The Alpha King had fought for 3 days without sleep to protect his territory. He returned home expecting blood, broken walls, and the worst nightmare any alpha could imagine. Instead, his entire den was silent. No guards rushed to greet him. No elders came to report. Only an eerie calm waited inside. The moment he stepped into the nursery, his heart nearly stopped. A strange young woman was asleep on the cold stone floor. His newborn pups were curled against her chest.
Clean, fed,
Safe. Sleeping more peacefully than they had in weeks. She carried no scent of his pack. No warrior had reported her arrival. No one could explain how she had crossed the strongest defenses in the kingdom. The Alpha's claws tightened. Every instinct screamed that she should have been his greatest enemy. But his own pups had already chosen to trust her. What he didn't know was that while he had been winning wars beyond the borders, someone inside his own pack had already begun stealing his throne. And the sleeping stranger was about to expose a betrayal that would change the kingdom forever. The Alpha King had faced armies that darkened the mountains with their numbers. He had walked through storms of steel without lowering his head. He had buried friends beside frozen rivers and watched enemies kneel before his strength. Every battle had taken something from him. Every victory had demanded another piece of his soul. Yet none of those wars filled his heart with the fear he carried as he crossed the border toward home. The forest welcomed him with a silence that did not belong. Usually the trees whispered with the voices of hunters returning from patrol. Wolves called to one another across the hills. Young warriors trained beneath the old pines while children chased each other through the morning light. The pack was never truly quiet. Today the wind carried nothing. Even the birds had disappeared. His horse slowed beneath him, as though it also felt the weight pressing against the air. The Alpha raised his eyes toward the distant cliffs where his great den stood carved into the mountain. Smoke still rose from the chimneys. The gates remained open. Everything looked untouched. That was what troubled him the most. A peaceful kingdom never felt this empty. He urged his horse forward until the stone walls towered above him. Guards stood at their posts, but none of them met his eyes. Their heads lowered as he passed. Their shoulders stiffened. Fear hung over them like a heavy fog. The Alpha climbed from his horse without speaking. His boots struck the stone path with slow, steady steps. Every sound echoed across the courtyard. Every echo reminded him that something inside these walls had changed while he had been away. No warriors rushed forward to welcome him. No elders offered reports from the council. No laughter drifted through the open windows. Only silence. He moved deeper into the heart of the den. The scent reached him before anything else. Fresh bread, warm milk, clean blankets. His brow tightened. None of it made sense. This was the scent of comfort. The scent of peace. Yet everyone he passed looked ready to run. A young servant crossed the hallway carrying a basket of folded cloth. The moment she noticed the Alpha, she nearly dropped everything in her hands. Her face turned pale. She bowed quickly and hurried away without saying a word. He stopped watching her. Fear was spreading through the den like poison. Someone wanted him to notice it. Someone wanted him to ask questions. But the Alpha had survived too many wars to chase shadows. He trusted his instincts. They pulled him toward only one place. The nursery. His pace quickened. Each step felt heavier than the last. His pups were all that remained of the life he once dreamed of. Their mother had died bringing the youngest into the world. Since then he had buried himself in endless battles because fighting enemies felt easier than facing empty rooms filled with memories. He had convinced himself every war protected them. Now he wondered if every war had simply left them alone. The nursery door stood slightly open. No guards. No nurses. No voices. Only quiet breathing. The Alpha pushed the door wider. Time stopped. Sunlight spilled through the high windows like streams of gold. Dust floated gently through the air. Soft blankets covered the floor. Wooden toys rested where tiny hands had left them. The room looked warmer than he remembered. Then he saw her. A young woman slept beside the fireplace. She wore simple clothing stained by travel. Her hair spilled across the blanket beneath her. One hand rested protectively across the smallest pup. The others were sleeping against her as though they had known her forever. One rested against her shoulder. Another curled beneath her arm. The youngest lay peacefully across her chest. None of them looked frightened. None of them looked hungry. Their tiny faces carried peaceful smiles he had not seen in weeks. The alpha forgot how to breathe. Every instinct inside him exploded at once. She carried no scent of his bloodline, no mark of his pack, no symbol of any neighboring kingdom. She was a stranger, a complete stranger. No outsider had entered this den in generations. No outsider should have survived long enough to reach this room. Yet here she was,
Sleeping.
completely unaware that the most feared alpha in the realm stood only a few steps away. His hand slowly reached for the sword hanging at his side. Years of battle had taught him one lesson above all others. Trust nothing that appears impossible. He studied every corner of the room. No broken windows. No hidden passage. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Everything remained untouched, as though the mountain itself had opened to let her inside. One of the pups stirred gently. The little boy opened sleepy eyes and looked toward the alpha. For a heartbeat, the child simply smiled. Then he reached back toward the sleeping woman instead of his father. The tiny fingers wrapped around hers. The woman never woke. She simply tightened her hand around his without opening her eyes. The child fell asleep again. The alpha felt something colder than fear. His own son had reached for a stranger before reaching for him. The realization struck harder than any blade. How long had this been happening? How many nights had another person comforted the children while he fought battles far away? How many memories had he already missed? His gaze drifted toward the small table beside the bed. Fresh bowls stood neatly arranged. Every meal had been finished. Fresh water waited nearby. Clean clothes had been folded with care. The room had been cleaned from top to bottom. Nothing had been neglected. Someone had cared for his children with patience that only family could give. Yet he had never seen this woman before. His heart wanted to believe this miracle. His mind refused, because miracles never arrived without a price. Somewhere beyond these walls, someone had allowed this stranger into the safest place in the kingdom. No guard could have missed her. No servant could have ignored her. Someone had opened the gates. Someone had hidden the truth. Someone inside his own pack had chosen silence. And as the alpha looked once more at the peaceful faces of his sleeping pups, he understood something far more terrifying than any enemy waiting beyond his borders. The greatest danger had never been outside his kingdom. It had been waiting for him inside his own home. The Alpha King did not move. The room remained still as though the mountain itself was holding its breath. His eyes never left the stranger sleeping beside the fire. Every instinct forged through years of blood and battle demanded that he wake her. Every lesson carved into his soul warned him that mercy could become a weapon in the wrong hands. Yet nothing before him matched the danger his mind expected to find. The smallest pup shifted softly and buried his face against the young woman's shoulder. A tiny smile appeared across the little boy's face. It was the kind of smile children wore only when they felt completely safe. The alpha searched for fear in his son's expression but found none. He searched for confusion but saw only peace. That simple moment struck deeper than any enemy blade had ever reached. He slowly knelt beside them. His movements were careful and silent. His shadows stretched across the floor, but the children did not wake. They trusted the warmth surrounding them. They trusted the heartbeat beneath the stranger more than the silence that had filled this room since their mother had passed away. His eyes wandered across every detail. Fresh blankets covered the stone floor. Tiny wooden toys had been repaired instead of thrown away. Small wolf carvings rested beside each sleeping child. Even the fireplace had been cleaned until the stones looked almost new. Nothing had been done carelessly. Everything spoke of patience. Everything spoke of love. That truth unsettled him more than any hidden assassin ever could. A woman capable of entering the safest place in the kingdom without leaving a single trace should have terrified his children. Instead, they clung to her as though she belonged there. The alpha reached toward the youngest pup. His fingers brushed gently across the child's hair. The little boy stirred. Slowly his eyes opened. For one beautiful moment, father and son looked into each other's faces. The alpha expected joy. He expected excitement. Instead, the child looked tired. The little boy smiled softly, then whispered with sleepy innocence, "You came home." Only 4 simple words. Yet each one carried a quiet pain. Not welcome home. Not where have you been. Only the gentle surprise that his father had finally returned. The alpha felt his chest tighten. Before he could answer, the child drifted back to sleep. His tiny hand never released the stranger's fingers. Silence returned. A silence heavier than before. The alpha lowered his head. There had been a time when every laugh from these children echoed through the halls because he was there to hear it. Before endless wars. Before duty consumed every sunrise. Before loss turned his heart into stone. He had promised their dying mother he would protect them. He had believed defeating enemies was enough. Now he realized protection meant far more than victory on distant battlefields. Children could survive without danger. They could not grow without love. Footsteps echoed faintly outside the nursery. The alpha rose instantly. The nursery door opened only a little. An older nurse stepped inside carrying another basket of clean clothes. The moment she saw him, her face drained of color. She froze. Her hands trembled. The basket slipped from her grasp and soft blankets scattered across the floor. "Forgive me, my king," she whispered. The alpha studied her without anger. "How long has she been here?" The nurse swallowed hard. "Several days."
His voice remained calm.
"Who allowed it?" The old woman lowered her eyes. No one stopped her. That answer made no sense. Every entrance to the den was guarded day and night. No stranger crossed those gates unnoticed. Someone saw her. Someone chose silence. The alpha stepped closer. Did she threaten anyone? No, my king. Did she harm the children? Never. Did she ask for food or shelter? The nurse slowly shook her head. She only asked where the crying was coming from. The alpha remained silent. The old woman continued speaking almost against her own will. She found the children alone. The youngest had been crying for hours. She picked him up before anyone could stop her. We thought he would scream because she was a stranger. Instead, he fell asleep in her arms within moments. The room felt colder. Where were their caretakers? The nurse's eyes filled with shame.
Some had left.
Some refused to stay. Others feared the council more than they feared neglect. The alpha stared at her. The council? She immediately realized she had spoken too much. Fear covered her face. "Please forgive me. I have already said enough." The alpha did not answer. Instead, he looked back toward the sleeping woman. She had entered searching only for a crying child. Nothing more. No demands. No threats. No reward. She had simply stayed. His thoughts became darker. If the council knew children had been neglected, then why had no one informed him? If servants feared speaking, then who had created such fear? Questions gathered like storm clouds inside his mind. The old nurse quietly picked up the fallen blankets. Before leaving, she hesitated. "My king." He looked toward her. "The children have smiled again because of her." Those words lingered long after she disappeared into the hallway. The alpha remained motionless. Outside the nursery, the kingdom still looked peaceful. Inside his thoughts, war had already begun. His gaze returned once more to the stranger. Soft strands of hair rested across her face. There were signs of exhaustion beneath her closed eyes. Small scratches covered her hands. Travel dust still clung to the edges of her clothing. She looked less like an invader and more like someone who had been running from something far worse than wolves. Then another detail caught his attention. Near the edge of her sleeve rested a faded scar. It was old, almost forgotten. Yet the shape of it stirred something buried deep within his memory. He had seen a mark like that before. Many years ago. Long before he became king. Long before war hardened his heart. He could not remember where. He could not remember why. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. That scar did not belong to an ordinary traveler. As the fire crackled softly beside them, the alpha felt fate tightening around his kingdom. The stranger had not simply wandered into his life. She had arrived carrying answers to questions he had not yet learned to ask. And somewhere beyond the nursery walls, hidden behind loyal smiles and respectful bows, someone was already waiting for him to make the wrong move. The Alpha King had defeated warriors who carried poison beneath their blades and lies behind their smiles. He had learned that the most dangerous enemy was never the one standing in front of him. It was always the one waiting quietly in the shadows. As he looked at the sleeping stranger beside his children, he felt that lesson return with greater force than ever before. Someone inside his own kingdom had hidden the truth from him. That betrayal could no longer remain buried. He stepped away from the nursery without making a sound. Before leaving, he looked back one final time. The fire painted a warm glow across the room. His pups slept peacefully. The young woman never stirred. For the first time since their mother had died, the nursery felt alive instead of empty. That sight stayed with him as he closed the door behind him. The hallway outside was colder than the room he had left. Stone walls stretched into the distance beneath flickering torches. Every servant who crossed his path lowered their head. None of them spoke. None of them dared meet his eyes. Their silence no longer looked like respect. It looked like fear. The Alpha walked toward the council chamber. His footsteps echoed through the ancient halls. Each step carried purpose. Each breath sharpened his thoughts. By the time he reached the great wooden doors, his expression had become unreadable. The guards opened the entrance immediately. Inside the chamber, the council elders sat around a massive table carved from black oak. Maps covered its surface. Reports lay scattered beside polished cups that still carried the scent of fresh tea. They had already gathered without waiting for their king. The oldest elder stood first. "Welcome home, my king. We feared the border war would continue much longer." The Alpha remained standing. His eyes slowly passed across every face. Some smiled. Some avoided his gaze. Some looked almost relieved. Not one of them looked surprised to see him alive. The silence stretched long enough to make every elder uncomfortable. Finally, the Alpha spoke. "How many days have I been gone?" "Only 5, my king." 5 days. Such a short answer. Such a simple truth. Yet 5 days had been enough for his entire world to change. He looked toward another elder. "How often have you visited my children?" The old man hesitated. "They have excellent caretakers." "That was not my question." Another silence. Then the elder answered quietly. "I have been occupied with matters of the kingdom." The Alpha nodded slowly. One by one, he asked every member of the council the same question. Each answer sounded different. Yet every excuse carried the same emptiness. No one had truly cared. No one had gone. No one had noticed. Or perhaps they had noticed and chosen to remain blind. The Alpha rested both hands upon the great table. The room became so still that even the crackling fire seemed to disappear. "This morning I found a stranger inside my nursery." Shock spread across several faces. Others reacted too slowly. One elder reached for his cup before realizing his mistake. Another looked toward the man seated beside him instead of toward the Alpha. Small movements. Tiny mistakes. Enough for a warrior trained to read battlefields. One of them already knew. "Who allowed her inside?" No one answered. The Alpha repeated the question. "Who allowed her inside?" The eldest council member finally spoke. "Perhaps she slipped through during the confusion after the border attack." The Alpha looked directly into his eyes. There was no confusion. The gates never fell. The elder lowered his head. "Then we do not know." The Alpha said nothing. He simply watched them, long enough for discomfort to become panic. He had questioned prisoners for years. Silence often revealed more than words ever could. At last he stepped back. "Find every guard who stood watch during my absence. Bring every record from the gates. Every patrol report. Every visitor. Every servant assignment. Nothing is to disappear. Nothing is to change."
His voice remained calm.
That calm frightened them more than shouting ever would. The council bowed together. As the Alpha turned toward the door, one voice called after him. "My king." He stopped without looking back. The elder continued carefully. "Surely one unknown woman cannot be more important than rebuilding after war." The Alpha finally turned. His eyes were colder than winter. She reached my children before any of you did. No one spoke. The words struck harder than an accusation. He left the chamber. Behind him, whispers immediately filled the room. The Alpha did not need to hear them. He already knew fear had entered the council. Outside the chamber, evening slowly settled across the mountains. Golden light stretched over the stone walls before fading into deep blue shadows. Wolves called from distant cliffs, welcoming the coming night. The kingdom appeared peaceful. It was an illusion. As he crossed the courtyard, a young stable boy came running toward him. The child stopped several steps away and bowed quickly. My king. The Alpha waited. The boy looked over both shoulders before speaking again. Someone burned the nursery records yesterday. The Alpha felt his heartbeat slow, not faster.
Slower. Who told you that?
I saw the ashes behind the storage house. The Alpha studied the boy's frightened face. Why tell me now? Because my mother said someone should. She was too afraid. But I am not. For the first time that day, a faint expression touched the Alpha's face. Not a smile. Something quieter. Something filled with respect. He rested one hand on the boy's shoulder. You have done your kingdom a great service. The child bowed once more, then hurried away into the growing darkness. The Alpha lifted his eyes toward the smoke rising beyond the storage buildings. Nursery records. Destroyed. Someone had erased the past before his return. Someone expected him to ask questions. Someone had prepared for this moment long before he crossed the border. As the first stars appeared above the mountains, the Alpha understood one truth with absolute certainty. The stranger sleeping beside his children was no longer the greatest mystery inside his kingdom. The people desperately trying to hide her arrival were. Night settled over the mountain like a dark cloak. Cold wind slipped through the narrow paths between the stone walls. Torches burned along the outer roads, but their light could not chase away the feeling that unseen eyes were watching every step the Alpha King took. The kingdom looked calm from the outside. Deep beneath that calm, something dangerous had already begun to move. The Alpha walked alone toward the old storage house behind the eastern wall. He ignored the guards who offered to follow him. He wanted no witnesses. If someone had destroyed the nursery records, then the ashes might still be hiding a truth that careless hands had failed to erase. The building stood at the edge of the training grounds where very few servants ever came after sunset. Its heavy wooden door hung slightly open. A weak smell of smoke drifted into the cold air. The fire had died hours ago, yet the scent remained fresh enough to tell him this had not happened many days before. He stepped inside. The room was dark except for a narrow beam of moonlight falling through a crack in the roof. Dust floated slowly through the silver light. Empty shelves lined the walls. Broken chests rested in the corners. At the center of the room lay a circle of black ashes where records had once been stacked with care. The Alpha knelt beside them. His fingers touched the cold remains. Most of the pages had turned into nothing but black dust. Yet the fire had not been perfect. Small pieces still survived beneath the ashes. He lifted one burnt fragment carefully into the moonlight. Only a few words remained. Infant care. Second watch. Transferred. Nothing more. Not enough to answer his questions. Enough to prove someone had wanted those words erased forever. He searched again. Another small piece appeared beneath the ash. This one carried only a single name. Mara. The Alpha repeated the name silently. He had never heard it before. Not among servants. Not among warriors. Not among healers. Someone named Mara had once been connected to the nursery. Now every record of that person had vanished. His thoughts were interrupted by soft footsteps outside. Instantly he stood. His hand rested upon the sword at his side. The footsteps stopped. Then came the quiet voice of an old man. My king. The Alpha recognized him immediately. It was Rowan, the oldest groundskeeper in the kingdom. His back had bent with age, but his eyes remained clear. The old man stepped slowly into the doorway carrying a lantern whose warm light pushed away the darkness. I thought I might find you here. The Alpha lowered his hand from his sword. Did you know these records were burned? Rowan nodded without surprise. I knew. Why did no one report it? The old man sighed. Because no one wished to become the next person who disappeared. Those words hung heavily between them. The alpha looked directly into his face. Who disappeared? Rowan hesitated only for a moment. The woman who cared for your pups before this stranger arrived. The alpha felt the ground beneath him grow colder.
Continue.
She was kind. The children loved her. Then one morning she was simply gone. The council said she had left the kingdom. No one believed them. No body was found. No farewell was spoken. Only silence remained. The alpha closed his eyes for a brief moment. Another caretaker. Another secret. Another lie hidden beneath the peaceful surface of his home. Why did no one tell me? Rowan looked toward the floor. Because every letter sent to the battlefield passed through the council before reaching you. Nothing reached you unless they allowed it. The alpha opened his eyes again. Each answer uncovered an even darker question. He had believed he ruled this kingdom. Now he wondered if he had merely worn the crown while others controlled everything behind his back. The old groundskeeper slowly reached inside his coat. For a single heartbeat, the alpha prepared himself. Instead of a weapon, the old man removed a tiny wooden wolf. Its edges were worn smooth. Its paint had faded with time. One side carried the marks of little teeth where a child had once chewed upon it. The youngest pup dropped this the day the old caretaker vanished. No one noticed. I kept it. The alpha accepted the small carving. His large hand almost swallowed it completely. Then he noticed something carved beneath the base. A single symbol. Not the mark of his kingdom. Not the mark of any neighboring pack. A crescent moon surrounded by tiny leaves. The same shape he had seen years ago. The same memory that refused to return. His heartbeat slowed. Where did this symbol come from? Rowan shook his head. I do not know. But the stranger sleeping beside your children wears it as well. The alpha looked up sharply. Are you certain? I saw it stitched inside her cloak when the nurses washed it this morning. Silence filled the room. Two women, unknown to the kingdom, connected by the same forgotten mark. One had vanished. The other had appeared without warning. Neither seemed to be the true enemy. Someone else stood between them. Someone powerful enough to erase names, burn records, control messages, and make loyal servants disappear without leaving a trace. Outside, the wind grew stronger. The lantern flame flickered wildly. A distant wolf suddenly howled from somewhere beyond the forest. Its cry echoed through the mountains like a warning carried across the night. The alpha stepped toward the doorway. His eyes searched the darkness stretching beyond the walls. Far below the mountain, he noticed a tiny moving light. Then another. Then another. 3 lanterns. Traveling together. Not toward the kingdom. Away from it. Leaving through the northern pass, where no patrol had been assigned. His expression hardened. Someone was running. Not because he had returned. Because they knew he had started asking the right questions. And whoever fled into the darkness carried a secret that could either destroy his throne forever or reveal why a mysterious young woman had become the only person his children trusted. Before dawn could touch the mountain peaks, the Alpha King was already moving. The cold air carried the scent of pine and wet stone as he rode toward the northern pass, where the 3 lanterns had disappeared into the darkness only hours before. Frost covered the narrow trail like shattered glass beneath his horse. Every breath rose into the sky as white mist. The world looked peaceful, but his instincts told him the hunt had already begun. He rode alone, not because he lacked loyal warriors, because he no longer knew who among them remained truly loyal. That truth burned deeper than the freezing wind against his face. As the first light spread across the eastern sky, he reached the northern pass. Fresh hoofprints marked the soft earth. 3 horses had indeed traveled this road during the night. One animal had been carrying extra weight. The tracks pressed deeper into the ground than the others. The Alpha dismounted. He crouched beside the trail. His fingers brushed the damp soil. The prints were recent, no more than a few hours old. Then his sharp eyes caught something resting beside a patch of wild grass. A strip of blue cloth. It had torn away from a traveling cloak. He picked it up slowly. The fabric carried the same faint scent he had noticed inside the nursery. Not the mysterious woman. Someone else. Someone who had been close enough to her for their scents to mix. His thoughts grew sharper. The people fleeing the kingdom were connected to her arrival. Whether they protected her or hunted her remained unclear. He slipped the cloth inside his coat and continued following the trail on foot. The path narrowed as it climbed higher into the cliffs. Loose stones shifted beneath every careful step. Far below, the river crashed against black rocks, sending white mist into the air. Hours passed. The tracks suddenly stopped. The Alpha frowned. No rider, simply vanished. He searched the ground again. Nothing. Then he looked upward. A narrow ledge disappeared into thick trees above the cliff. Someone had deliberately hidden the trail. Only experienced scouts would notice it. The Alpha climbed without hesitation. Branches brushed against his shoulders as he entered the hidden forest above the pass. Sunlight barely reached the ground beneath the towering trees. Moss covered ancient stones. Birds sang somewhere high above, yet the forest itself felt strangely abandoned. He slowed. Something was wrong. No animal scents. No fresh nests. No movement. Only silence. His hand rested upon the hilt of his sword. A sudden crack echoed through the woods. The Alpha spun toward the sound. Nothing. Another crack followed behind him.
Still nothing.
Then an arrow struck the tree only inches from his head. He moved instantly. A second arrow buried itself where he had stood a heartbeat earlier. The Alpha disappeared behind a fallen log. His breathing remained calm. His eyes searched every shadow. The attack had not been meant to kill. The arrows had landed too far away. Someone was warning him. Or guiding him. He remained still. The forest fell silent again. Then a voice drifted through the trees. "Leave this place while you still can." The voice belonged to a woman.
Young. Steady.
Hidden. The Alpha answered without raising his voice. "Show yourself." Silence returned. Then the same calm voice came again. "If you keep searching, you will lose more than your crown." The Alpha stepped into the open. "I have already lost enough." No answer followed. Only the sound of leaves moving gently above him. He searched every branch, every shadow. Whoever had spoken knew the forest well. Perhaps they were watching him even now. After several moments, he continued deeper inside. Soon he found the remains of a small campsite. The fire was cold. The tents had been removed. Only faint circles remained where they had once stood. Someone had left in great haste. Yet they had not cleaned everything. Near a fallen tree rested an empty leather pouch. Inside lay dried herbs used by healers. Not soldiers. Not hunters. He turned the pouch over. A tiny crescent moon had been stitched into the leather. The same forgotten symbol. His pulse quickened. He was finally following something real. Not rumors. Not guesses. Evidence. As he searched the camp, one final object caught his attention. A small wooden bowl. Inside rested warm porridge. Still fresh. Someone had abandoned breakfast only moments before he arrived. They had seen him coming. The Alpha slowly stood. His eyes lifted toward the thick forest surrounding the clearing. "You do not fear me." His voice echoed softly between the trees. The hidden woman answered almost immediately.
"No."
"I fear the people following you." The Alpha froze. "Following me?" For the first time, uncertainty entered the stranger's voice. "You truly do not know." The Alpha listened carefully. Branches shifted somewhere beyond the clearing. Not one direction. Several. His instincts exploded with warning. He was no longer the hunter. Someone else had quietly surrounded the forest while his attention remained fixed ahead. Steel flashed between the trees. Dark cloaked figures emerged from every side without making a sound. Not bandits. Not ordinary assassins. Each one wore the same silver wolf emblem stitched onto black leather armor. The emblem of the Royal Shadow Guard. The king's own secret protectors. Warriors who answered only to the throne. Yet the Alpha had never ordered them here. Slowly, the leader removed his hood. He bowed with perfect respect. "Forgive us, my king." The council commanded that no one leave this forest alive. The Alpha stared into the warrior's eyes. In that single moment, he understood something that chilled him far more than betrayal. Someone inside the council had begun using his own authority to issue orders in his name. And if the royal shadow guard had obeyed those false commands, then the conspiracy had already spread deeper into the kingdom than he had ever imagined. The Alpha King did not reach for a sword. He stood perfectly still as the royal shadow guard closed around the clearing. Their black armor reflected faint beams of sunlight that slipped through the towering trees. Their faces showed no hatred, no anger, only discipline. These were warriors he had trained with his own hands. Men who had once sworn that no command would ever stand above the voice of their king. Yet today they had come to silence him. The leader remained bowed with his head lowered. "My king, we believed these orders came from you." The Alpha studied every face surrounding him. None of them carried the confidence of traitors. Their eyes held confusion. Doubt had already begun to grow among them. Slowly, he stepped forward. "Who delivered those orders?" The captain answered without hesitation. "They arrived sealed with the royal crest and signed by the High Council. We were told enemies had kidnapped you after the border war. We were ordered to protect the kingdom by eliminating every witness connected to the false rumors." The Alpha felt something inside him settle. Not rage.
Clarity.
The council had not simply hidden the truth. They had built an entirely different truth. One powerful enough to deceive even his most loyal warriors. His voice remained calm. "Look at me." Every member of the Shadow Guard lifted his eyes. "Do I look like a prisoner?" The captain slowly shook his head. "Do I stand before you as a man rescued from captivity?" Again the answer was no. "Then who has been using my name?" Silence swept across the clearing. The question struck every warrior harder than any weapon could. The Alpha watched uncertainty spread from one face to another. He knew that battles were not always won through strength. Sometimes a single truth shattered an army more completely than 1,000 swords. Behind the circle of soldiers, a branch snapped beneath careful feet. The hidden woman had not left. She was still watching. The Alpha spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Whoever is hiding among these trees saved my children without asking for reward. Whoever ordered her death is the true enemy of this kingdom." Several warriors exchanged uneasy glances. The captain lowered his weapon completely. "If what you say is true, then we have been hunting an innocent woman." The Alpha nodded. "You have." The forest fell quiet once more. Then a young female voice drifted gently through the trees. "Not innocent, only unwanted." Every warrior turned toward the sound. Leaves rustled softly. A figure stepped from behind an ancient oak. It was not the woman sleeping in the nursery. She was older, perhaps 30 winters. Her green cloak blended almost perfectly with the forest around her. Long dark hair rested over one shoulder. A bow remained in her hand, though its string hung loose. No one moved. Her eyes settled on the Alpha. "You finally came yourself." The Alpha looked carefully at the crescent moon stitched upon her cloak. "You know the woman in my den?" The stranger nodded slowly. "She is my younger sister." Those words changed everything. The Shadow Guard remained silent. The Alpha took one careful step closer. "Why did she enter my kingdom?" The woman looked toward the sky before answering. "Because she had nowhere else to go. She had spent weeks fleeing men who wished to erase every person carrying our family mark. She collapsed near your border. Then she heard a child crying inside the mountain. She followed the sound. Nothing more." The Alpha remembered the old nurse telling him the same story. Every piece fit together. Yet one question remained. "Who wants your family dead?" Pain crossed the woman's face. "The same people who now want you removed from your throne." The clearing became still. The captain of the Shadow Guard stared between them. "My king, none of this makes sense." The woman answered before the Alpha could speak. "It will soon." She reached inside her cloak very slowly. Every warrior tensed. Instead of a weapon, she removed a folded piece of aged parchment. The edges had darkened with time. The royal seal remained broken. She handed it directly to the Alpha. "This was written by your father before he died." The Alpha frowned. "My father has been dead for 20 years. She nodded. "Not everything buried stays buried forever." The Alpha unfolded the parchment carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable.
Strong. Steady.
His father's own hand. His breathing slowed as he read the first lines. If this letter has reached my son, then the council has already begun its final betrayal. The Alpha stopped reading. His heartbeat echoed loudly inside his chest. He lifted his eyes toward the woman. Where did you get this? My mother guarded it until the day she died. She made us swear never to reveal it unless the throne itself stood in danger. The Alpha looked back at the ancient letter. Every answer he had searched for during the past 2 days suddenly seemed much closer. Yet before he could continue reading, a sharp whistle cut through the forest. Every member of the Shadow Guard instantly turned toward the sound. The captain drew his sword. Archers. The warning came too late. Dozens of arrows burst from the trees. Not aimed at the Alpha. Not aimed at the guards. Every arrow flew toward the woman carrying his father's letter. Someone had waited patiently for this exact moment. Someone knew she possessed the one secret capable of destroying the conspiracy forever. The first arrow tore through the morning air like a scream. The Alpha King moved before thought could catch him. His body remembered 1,000 battlefields. His hand seized the woman by her arm and pulled her toward the shelter of a thick oak as a rain of arrows shattered branches above their heads. Wood splintered. Leaves exploded into the air. The ancient letter slipped from his hand, then landed only a few steps away upon the forest floor. The captain of the Shadow Guard reacted at once. He lifted his sword toward the unseen attackers. Protect the king. His warriors formed a circle without hesitation. Steel flashed beneath the pale sunlight as shields locked together. Arrow after arrow struck the iron wall with heavy blows. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder rolling between the mountains. The Alpha looked toward the fallen letter, only a few feet away. Yet every step toward it carried death. The woman beside him struggled to breathe. Her shoulder had been cut by one of the arrows. Blood soaked slowly into the green cloth covering her arm. She pressed her hand against the wound, but never looked at it. Her eyes remained fixed upon the ancient letter resting among the fallen leaves. You cannot let them take it. The Alpha nodded once. I will not. Another wave of arrows crashed into the clearing. Several shadow guards staggered backward beneath the force of the attack. One young warrior cried out as an arrow pierced his leg. He collapsed, but still raised his shield to protect the others. The Alpha studied the forest. The attackers never revealed themselves. Only shadows. Only movement between the trees. Professional killers. Patient hunters. They wanted confusion, not battle. Then something caught his attention. The arrows striking the shields came from only one direction. The earlier attack had surrounded the clearing. This one did not. Someone had rushed the ambush before every archer reached position. Their plan was no longer perfect. That mistake created opportunity. The Alpha lowered himself beside the wounded woman. Stay behind the shields. She shook her head. If you die, the letter dies with you. The Alpha answered quietly. If I do nothing, we both die here. Without waiting for another word, he broke from the defensive circle. The captain shouted after him, but the Alpha was already running. His boots pounded across the forest floor. Another storm of arrows followed immediately. He twisted between ancient trees with impossible speed. One arrow sliced across his arm. Another buried itself in the ground where his foot had landed a heartbeat before. The ancient letter lay ahead. Only a few more steps. He dived forward. His fingers closed around the parchment. The moment he touched it, a sharp voice rang through the forest.
Kill him now.
The hidden commander had finally spoken. That single order changed everything. Dark figures burst from the trees carrying curved blades instead of bows. Their faces remained hidden beneath black cloth. They moved silently across the clearing like wolves closing around wounded prey. The Alpha rose to his feet. His sword left its sheath with one smooth motion. The first assassin reached him. One strike. One movement. The attacker fell without another sound. A second rushed forward. The Alpha turned beneath the swinging blade, then drove his shoulder into the attacker's chest. The man crashed against a tree and disappeared beneath broken branches. No wasted movement. No anger. Only precision. The Shadow Guard saw their king fighting beside them instead of hiding behind them. Something changed inside those warriors. They charged together. The defensive wall shattered into an advancing line. The forest exploded into chaos. Steel rang against steel. Boots tore through fallen leaves. Voices echoed beneath the towering trees. The alpha fought toward the wounded woman. Every step brought another attacker. Every breath carried another challenge. Then, through the chaos, he noticed something strange. The assassins ignored every other target. Their eyes searched only for the parchment in his hand. Not the king. Not revenge. The letter. It was more valuable than his life. The realization struck with incredible force. Whatever his father had written possessed enough power to destroy everything the conspirators had built. Suddenly, a familiar face appeared among the attackers. The alpha stopped for the briefest moment. One of the council messengers. The same man who had carried reports during every campaign for the past 5 years. He wore assassin clothing now. Their eyes met across the clearing. Recognition flashed between them. The messenger turned immediately and fled deeper into the forest. The alpha pointed his sword toward the escaping figure. Take him alive. Several shadow guards broke away in pursuit. The messenger disappeared between towering pines. The chase carried them far from the battlefield. Silence slowly returned as the remaining assassins realized their surprise attack had failed. One after another they retreated into the dense woods until only broken branches and scattered arrows remained behind. The clearing stood battered and scarred. Several guards nursed wounds. The wounded woman remained alive though pale from blood loss. The alpha finally unfolded the letter once again. This time he managed to read beyond the opening lines. His father's words seemed almost alive upon the old parchment. The council serves the throne only while it fears the truth. The day they discover the bloodline of the Moonkeepers, they will hunt every survivor, because only that family knows who truly has the right to choose the next Alpha King. The Alpha looked slowly toward the wounded woman, then toward the direction of the nursery far beyond the mountains where her younger sister still slept beside his children. The crescent moon symbol, the vanished caretaker, the mysterious stranger. None of it had been coincidence. Both women belonged to the family his father had trusted above every council elder. Before he could read another line, the captain of the Shadow Guard returned from the forest with a grim expression. My king. The messenger escaped, but he left something behind. The captain opened his hand. Resting upon his palm was a heavy silver ring engraved with the personal seal of the highest-ranking elder in the council. For the first time, the Alpha no longer suspected betrayal. He could finally prove it. The Alpha King closed his hand around the silver ring until its sharp edges pressed into his skin. The cold metal no longer felt like jewelry. It felt like a confession. For years, the highest elder had stood beside the throne, offering wisdom and loyalty while quietly building a kingdom within the kingdom. Every respectful bow had hidden another lie. Every promise had carried another chain. At last, the mask had begun to fall. The wounded woman leaned against the great oak, while one of the shadow guards wrapped clean cloth around her injured shoulder. Pain covered her face, but fear had disappeared. She watched the Alpha with calm eyes as though she had waited many years for this exact moment to arrive. The captain stepped closer. My king. The Alpha looked toward him. Gather every warrior whose loyalty belongs to the throne alone. Speak to no council member. Send no written orders. Trust only those whose honor you would trust with your own blood. The captain struck his fist against his chest. It will be done. Without another word, he disappeared into the forest with several trusted guards. They moved quickly between the trees until only silence remained behind them. The Alpha unfolded the ancient letter once more. His father's writing continued across the faded parchment. If the council ever turns against the Moonkeepers, then they have already turned against the throne. Protect them, because one day they will protect your children when no one else can. The Alpha lowered the letter slowly. His mind returned to the nursery. The stranger had arrived without asking for safety. She had simply answered the cries of abandoned children. His father had trusted her family long before he had ever become king. Everything finally began to fit together. The woman beside him spoke softly. My father served yours until his final breath. When the old king died, the council hunted every person who knew the secret. They feared the truth more than any army. The Alpha listened without interrupting. She continued. They burned our home. They called us traitors. They erased our names from every record. Those who survived scattered across distant lands. My younger sister was only a child when we fled. The Alpha looked toward her. Why return now? Because the council has grown impatient. They no longer wish to control the throne. They wish to own it forever. The forest grew quiet again. Wind moved gently through the branches, carrying the scent of rain from distant mountains. The Alpha folded the letter with great care and placed it inside his coat. Then he looked toward the path leading back to the kingdom. We return today. The woman frowned. They will expect that. The Alpha nodded.
Exactly.
Hours later, the mountain fortress appeared once again against the afternoon sky. The great stone walls stood as proudly as ever. Guards remained at every gate. Servants crossed the courtyards carrying baskets and tools. From a distance, nothing had changed. Only the Alpha knew the peace was an illusion. As he entered through the main gate, every eye turned toward him. Word spread faster than wildfire. The king has returned. Within minutes, the council gathered inside the great hall. Long banners hung from towering pillars. Sunlight poured through high windows and painted golden shapes across the polished stone floor. The highest elder stepped forward, wearing his usual calm smile. My king, we were relieved to hear you survived your journey. The Alpha walked toward the throne without answering. He did not sit. Instead, he turned to face the entire council. His silence unsettled them. One by one, their smiles faded. The Alpha slowly opened his hand. The silver ring rested upon his palm. Recognition flashed across the highest elder's face before he forced his expression back under control. The Alpha noticed. So, did everyone else. His voice echoed through the hall. This ring belonged to a man who tried to murder witnesses inside the northern forest. No one moved. The Alpha continued. He escaped. But he carried your personal seal. The great hall became silent. The highest elder bowed respectfully. My king, many craftsmen can copy such things. The Alpha expected the answer. He reached inside his coat once more. Then he removed the ancient parchment. This letter bears my father's own hand. A shadow crossed the elder's face. For the first time, genuine fear appeared inside his eyes. The Alpha did not reveal the contents. Not yet. Instead, he folded it again. The council expected accusations. They expected anger. They expected arrests. He gave them none. He simply looked across every face. Tomorrow at sunrise, every elder will stand before the entire kingdom. Every captain, every servant, every warrior, every family. The truth will be spoken where every ear can hear it. The highest elder lowered his head. As you command, my king. His voice remained steady. His hands did not. The smallest tremble passed through his fingers before disappearing beneath the folds of his robe. The Alpha saw it. Fear had finally reached the man who had ruled from the shadows. The meeting ended without another word. As the council slowly left the great hall, the highest elder paused only once. For a single heartbeat, he glanced toward one narrow side corridor before continuing outside. The movement lasted no longer than a breath. Most people would never have noticed it. The Alpha did. After the hall emptied, he walked quietly toward that forgotten corridor. Torchlight flickered against rough stone walls. Dust covered the floor. Hardly anyone used this passage anymore. Near the far end, he discovered a wooden door standing slightly open. Inside was a small private chamber. Maps covered one wall. Letters lay scattered across a heavy table. Several candles still burned. Whoever had used the room had left only moments earlier. The Alpha stepped inside. His eyes moved across the papers. Most had already been thrown into the fireplace. Only one remained untouched. It carried a single line written in hurried ink. Take the girl from the nursery before sunrise. Do not let the king learn who she really is. The Alpha folded the message slowly. His expression hardened like stone. They were already moving against her. And dawn was only a few hours away. Darkness still covered the mountain when the Alpha King began to move. The kingdom slept beneath a sky filled with fading stars. Cold mist drifted across the stone paths. Every tower stood silent. Every torch burned low. Yet beneath that peaceful silence, a race had already begun. Somewhere inside these walls, loyal hearts fought against hidden hands. One side wanted to protect the future. The other wanted to erase it before sunrise. The Alpha left the secret chamber without a sound. The folded message remained hidden inside his coat. Each step carried him closer to the nursery. His thoughts no longer wandered between doubt and certainty. The truth had finally chosen its side. The council had never feared an invading army. They had feared a young woman whose only crime was carrying a forgotten bloodline. As he crossed the eastern hallway, he noticed something unusual. The guards outside the nursery had changed. Neither of the warriors standing there had been assigned to this wing before his departure. Their armor looked polished. Their faces remained calm.
Too calm.
The Alpha approached without slowing. The two guards bowed together. "Good morning, my king." Their voices sounded steady. Their eyes did not. One glanced briefly toward the nursery door. Only for a heartbeat. That tiny movement revealed everything. The Alpha stopped before them. "Who assigned your watch?" The taller guard answered quickly. "The High Council." The Alpha nodded once. "Step aside." Neither man moved. Silence stretched across the hallway. The Alpha repeated himself. "Step aside." The younger guard swallowed hard. "Forgive us, my king. Our orders were clear. No one enters until sunrise." The Alpha looked directly into his eyes. "Not even your king." The guard lowered his head.
Not even you.
The hallway seemed to grow colder. The Alpha slowly removed the silver ring from inside his coat. He held it where both men could see.
Do you recognize this?
Both guards froze.
They did.
The Alpha slipped the ring back into his pocket. Then he spoke with complete calm. "The man who gave you those orders serves himself. I serve this kingdom. Choose carefully which command you obey." Neither guard answered. For several long moments, no one moved. Then the older warrior removed his helmet. He dropped to one knee. "Forgive me, my king." The younger guard followed him. The nursery door opened. The Alpha entered without another word. Warm morning light filled the room. His children were already awake. Soft laughter drifted through the air. The youngest pup chased a carved wooden wolf across the blankets, while the others watched with bright, smiling eyes. The mysterious young woman sat beside them. She looked healthier than before, though weariness still rested beneath her eyes. The moment she saw the Alpha, she slowly stood. For the first time she bowed. "I never wished to bring danger into your home." The Alpha looked around the room. His children no longer appeared frightened. The empty sadness that had lived inside the nursery after their mother's death had disappeared. He looked back at the young woman. "Danger was already here before you arrived. You only revealed it." She lowered her eyes. "I should leave before more blood is spilled because of me." The Alpha shook his head.
No.
"You leave now, and the council wins forever." She looked at him with quiet surprise. The Alpha stepped toward the window overlooking the kingdom. Morning sunlight slowly climbed across rooftops and stone towers. People were already gathering in the great courtyard below. Warriors, servants, families. The entire kingdom answered the royal summons. Today, every lie ends. Before she could answer, hurried footsteps echoed through the hallway. The captain of the Shadow Guard entered carrying a sealed scroll. His breathing remained controlled, though urgency filled his face. "My king." The Alpha accepted the scroll. It came from the western gate only moments ago. He broke the seal. Inside rested a single sheet. Only one sentence had been written. "The council elders have vanished." The Alpha remained silent. The captain continued. "Their chambers are empty. Their horses are gone." Several wagons disappeared before dawn. The Alpha folded the message slowly. He had expected resistance. He had not expected flight. Cowards always run before the truth catches them. The captain hesitated. "There is more." Scouts found fresh tracks leading toward the old fortress beyond the Black Ridge. The Alpha knew that place. An abandoned fortress surrounded by cliffs and forests. Easy to defend, difficult to reach. The perfect place for desperate men planning one final stand. The young woman looked toward him. "They will destroy every piece of evidence before you arrive." The Alpha smiled for the first time since returning home. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the quiet confidence of a hunter who finally understood where the prey had chosen to hide. He turned toward the captain. Gather every warrior who still remembers what honor means. No banners. No drums. No announcements. We ride immediately. The captain struck his fist against his chest and left without another word. The alpha looked once more at his children. The youngest pup reached toward him with both tiny hands. Without hesitation, the alpha lifted the child into his arms. The little boy rested his head against his father's shoulder as though he had been waiting for that moment his entire life. The alpha closed his eyes for only a heartbeat. Everything he had almost lost stood within this room. His children. Their future. The truth. When he opened his eyes again, the softness was gone. Only purpose remained. Far beyond the mountain, the old fortress waited beneath gathering storm clouds. And inside those ancient walls, the final architects of betrayal were preparing for the battle that would decide who truly deserved to wear the crown. Storm clouds rolled across the mountains as the Alpha King reached the ancient fortress before sunset. Lightning flashed above broken towers that had stood abandoned for generations. Moss covered the old stone walls. Vines climbed through shattered windows. From a distance, the place looked forgotten by the world. Yet fresh horse tracks covered the muddy ground outside the gate. Smoke drifted from the tallest tower. The fortress had awakened once again. The Alpha stood upon the highest ridge, overlooking the valley. Behind him waited every warrior who had chosen honor over fear. No speeches filled the cold air. No battle cries echoed through the cliffs. Every man already understood why they had come. This was no longer a war for land. It was a battle for truth. The Alpha raised one hand. The gates opened from within. Not by enemies. By servants. Old servants. The same people who had spent years pretending not to see the corruption growing inside the kingdom. An elderly blacksmith stepped forward first. Then a cook. Then stable workers. Then healers. One after another they walked out carrying no weapons. Only tired faces. The old blacksmith lowered his head. We have waited many years for you to come yourself, my king. The Alpha looked toward the fortress.
Where are they?
The old man pointed toward the great hall. They locked themselves inside when they learned you were coming. They believe the walls will save them. The Alpha walked forward without hesitation. The great wooden doors stood shut. Heavy iron bars held them closed from the inside. The Alpha did not order his warriors to break them. Instead, he spoke loudly enough for every person inside to hear. Your walls protected your lies. They will not protect your future. Silence answered him. Then came the familiar voice of the highest elder. You have already lost. The kingdom believes whatever we choose to tell them. The Alpha smiled quietly. Not today. He reached inside his coat. Then he removed the ancient letter written by his father. He handed it to the captain of the Shadow Guard. Read every word. The captain climbed onto a fallen stone where everyone could hear him. His voice carried across the valley. The old king's words filled the air with truth buried for 20 years. He spoke of the Moonkeepers. He spoke of the sacred duty they carried. He named every elder who had betrayed the throne. He warned that the day they hunted the Moonkeepers would also be the day they declared war against the rightful king. Every sentence shattered another lie. Every word broke another chain. Servants began to cry. Warriors lowered their heads in shame. Some of the men guarding the fortress removed their weapons and threw them onto the ground. The silence inside the great hall became heavier than stone. Then the doors slowly opened. Not with strength, with surrender. The highest elder stepped into the fading light. His rich robes no longer looked powerful. His proud shoulders had fallen. The confidence that had ruled the kingdom for years had disappeared. Only an old, frightened man remained. He looked directly at the Alpha. Everything I did was for stability. The Alpha walked toward him. You abandoned children. You erased innocent families. You ruled through fear. That is not stability. That is cowardice. The elder lowered his eyes. For the first time in many years, he had no answer. One by one, the remaining council members followed him outside. None resisted. None denied the truth. They knew the game had ended. The captain of the Shadow Guard stepped beside the Alpha. What are your orders, my king? The Alpha looked across the gathered kingdom, then toward the frightened elders. Justice without revenge. Truth without cruelty. No child will ever inherit hatred because of this day. Take them back alive. Let every person witness their judgment beneath the law they tried to destroy. The warriors obeyed immediately. Chains replaced crowns. Silence replaced power. The storm finally broke. Rain began to fall across the valley. It washed blood from broken stones. It washed ash from forgotten walls. It washed the last shadows of betrayal from the kingdom. Days later, the great courtyard overflowed with people. Families filled every corner. Warriors stood beside farmers. Servants stood beside nobles. For the first time in many years, there were no hidden whispers, only open faces. The Alpha King stood before them with his children beside him. The young woman who had once been found asleep in the nursery stood quietly nearby with her older sister. Neither sought attention. Neither sought reward. The Alpha raised his voice. A kingdom is never protected by the strongest sword. It is protected by the people who choose kindness when no one is watching. His eyes turned toward the young woman. You entered this kingdom with nothing. You asked for nothing. Yet you gave my children the one thing I had failed to give them.
Peace.
The crowd remained silent. Not from fear. From respect. The youngest pup reached for the young woman's hand. She smiled softly and accepted it. The Alpha watched without jealousy. Only gratitude. At that moment, he finally understood what true strength meant. It was not winning endless wars. It was building a home where no child feared tomorrow. As the sun broke through the clouds, golden light spread across the mountain. The old banners of corruption were lowered forever. New banners rose beside them. The crescent moon of the moon keepers stood proudly beside the royal wolf. Not above it, not below it, together. A promise that truth and strength would never again be separated. High above the kingdom, wolves lifted their voices toward the bright morning sky. Their cries rolled across the mountains like the beginning of a new age. The Alpha King looked over the people he had sworn to protect. This time, he saw more than a kingdom. He saw a family. And for the first time since the day he lost his mate, he finally believed that the throne beneath him was no longer built upon fear. It was built upon loyalty, upon truth, upon hope. His enemies had tried to steal his crown. Instead, they had forced him to become the king his father had always believed he could be. And as the mountain echoed with the voices of a united pack, everyone knew that no force would ever again be strong enough to break the kingdom that had risen from betrayal into unshakable unity.
They called it justice, but everyone knew it was murder. Bound in chains before the entire kingdom, she was forced to make an impossible choice: kneel before the executioner's blade, or cross the Black Divide and become food for the beast that had haunted nightmares for centuries. The crowd mocked her. The nobles smiled. Even the people she had once protected lowered their eyes and let her die. But instead of begging for mercy, she turned her back on the kingdom and walked into the darkness. What no one knew was that the beast wasn't waiting for his next victim. He was the last Alpha King, betrayed by his own blood, stripped of his throne, and cursed into a monster. And the moment she chose the beast chose his queen, and every traitor who had stolen an empire unknowingly signed their own death sentence. The chains around her wrists were meant to break her spirit before they took her life. Every step she was forced to take echoed across the ancient stone road that led to the Black Divide. Thousands watched from both sides of the path. No one spoke for her. No one stepped forward. Faces she had known since childhood looked away as if she had already become a ghost. Children hid behind their mothers, while old men whispered prayers that had nothing to do with saving her. High above them, the black banners of the kingdom moved with the cold wind like shadows waiting for night to swallow the world. She kept her head high even though every bruise on her body begged her to fall. She had already lost everything that mattered. The only thing left was the choice they could never steal from her. The kingdom called this day a sacred tradition. The people called it justice because that was the lie they had been taught since birth. Every generation, one soul was offered to the beast beyond the Black Divide. The priests claimed the sacrifice protected the kingdom from destruction. The nobles claimed it preserved peace. The soldiers claimed it was the law. Yet no one dared ask why the innocent were always chosen while the powerful remained untouched. Fear had ruled the kingdom for so many years that even truth had forgotten its own name. She remembered the day her life began to fall apart. She had stood beside the same people who now watched her die. She had defended their homes during harsh winters. She had carried food to hungry children when the harvest failed. She had worked until her hands bled without asking for reward. Then one accusation spoken by a powerful noble erased every good deed she had ever done. They called her a traitor without proof. They judged her before the trial even began. Friends disappeared. Neighbors closed their doors. Those who once thanked her refused to meet her eyes. She learned that loyalty lasted only as long as it was safe. The great gates opened with a deep sound that rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Beyond them stretched the black divide. Ancient trees covered the hills until even sunlight seemed afraid to enter. Thick mist drifted between the trunks like silent spirits searching for forgotten names. Every child in the kingdom grew up hearing stories about that place. They said no bird sang there. They said no hunter returned. They said the beast watched, from the darkness with eyes that had seen the birth of kingdoms and the fall of kings. Every story ended the same way. Whoever entered never came back. The captain of the royal guard stepped forward. His polished armor reflected the pale morning light while his expression remained colder than steel. He looked at her without anger and without mercy. To him, she was simply another duty waiting to be completed. "You still have one chance," he said. His voice carried across the silent crowd. "Choose the sword, and your suffering ends quickly. Choose the beast, and no one will remember your name." She stared at him for a long moment. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair across her face. There was no fear in her eyes, only exhaustion that had settled deeper than pain. She slowly turned away from the execution platform. A quiet wave of confusion spread through the crowd. The captain frowned. The priests stopped chanting. Even the king, watching from his high balcony, leaned forward. She walked toward the forest. One step, then another. No chains pulled her back because she no longer belonged to the kingdom. Gasps echoed through the valley. No sacrifice had ever chosen the beast. Most begged for the blade. Some collapsed before reaching the gate. Others screamed until soldiers dragged them forward. She did none of those things. She walked into the darkness with calm determination though death itself had become easier than living among people who had already buried her in their hearts. Behind her, laughter slowly filled the air. The nobles smiled with quiet satisfaction. One whispered that the beast would finish what the kingdom had begun. Another laughed that the monster deserved rotten meat instead of fresh blood. None of them noticed the oldest priest standing perfectly still. His face had lost all color. His trembling hands tightened around an ancient staff carved with forgotten symbols. He looked toward the forest with growing fear, not fear for the woman, fear for the kingdom, because hidden inside the oldest temple was a truth that had been erased from every history book. The beast had not always been a beast. Long before the current king claimed the throne, there had been another ruler, one whose enemies could never defeat him in battle, one whose people had called him the Alpha King. The old priest had seen forbidden records locked beneath the temple floor. They spoke of betrayal instead of victory. They spoke of a curse instead of justice. They spoke of a king whose body had become monstrous while his spirit refused to bow. Every ruler after him had ordered those records destroyed. Every generation. Another sacrifice was sent into the forest not to feed the beast, but to ensure the truth never escaped. The woman crossed the final stone marker that separated the kingdom from the forbidden land. Silence swallowed everything behind her. The sounds of the crowd disappeared. The wind faded. Even her own footsteps seemed softer beneath the ancient trees. The air grew colder with every breath. Massive roots twisted across the ground like sleeping serpents. Towering branches blocked the sky until only narrow beams of gray light reached the earth below. Strange claw marks scarred the trunks of trees older than memory. Somewhere deep inside the endless forest, something heavy moved through the shadows. She stopped walking, not because she wanted to, because she felt it. A presence. Ancient, patient, watching. Two golden eyes slowly opened within the darkness. They did not burn with hunger. They burned with something far more terrifying. Recognition. And for the first time in countless years, the Forgotten King looked upon a human who had entered his prison without hatred and without fear. The forest did not welcome her. It watched her. Every tree stood like an ancient guardian that had witnessed centuries of blood and silence. The mist curled around her feet as though it wanted to pull her deeper into the forgotten land. She could no longer hear the kingdom behind her. The laughter of the nobles had vanished. The chants of the priests had become nothing more than fading memories. There was only the sound of her breathing and the slow beating of her heart. Every instinct warned her to turn back. Yet there was nothing left behind worth returning to. The kingdom had already buried her while she was still alive. Those golden eyes remained fixed upon her. They did not blink. They did not move. They simply watched with the patience of something that had lived longer than fear itself. The woman stood frozen beneath their gaze. She had expected a monster driven by hunger. Instead, she felt the weight of an ancient mind measuring every part of her soul. There was no rage inside those eyes, no madness, only endless loneliness hidden beneath impossible strength. A massive shape stepped from the darkness. The ground trembled beneath its weight. Black fur covered a body built like a mountain. Long scars crossed powerful shoulders that looked as though they had survived countless battles. Sharp claws rested against the earth without tearing it apart. Great horns curved backward above a face that carried both the features of a beast and the sorrow of a forgotten king. His golden eyes never left hers. He could have ended her life before she took another breath. Yet he remained perfectly still. She looked at him without raising a weapon because she had none, without pleading because no one had ever listened, without running because there was nowhere left to go. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them felt older than the forest itself. Then the beast took one slow step closer. His enormous shadow covered her completely. She closed her eyes for a single heartbeat and accepted whatever came next. Nothing happened. When she opened her eyes again, the beast had lowered his head slightly. His nose caught her scent as though searching for something hidden beyond flesh and blood. A deep breath escaped him. It carried no anger, only quiet surprise. He turned away. The woman frowned. She had expected death. Instead, the beast walked several steps into the forest before stopping. He looked back over one broad shoulder. The meaning was clear. Follow. She hesitated only for a moment before taking her first step after him. Far above the trees, a flock of black birds suddenly burst into the sky. Their cries echoed across the mountains. Deep inside the forest, wolves that had ruled these lands for years lowered their heads and disappeared into the shadows. Even the predators understood that something long forgotten had begun to awaken. The path grew narrower with every step. Ancient stone pillars appeared beneath hanging vines. Broken statues stood half-buried beneath roots thicker than a man's body. Moss covered every surface, but traces of old crowns and royal symbols still remained. The woman brushed her fingers across one weathered carving. She could barely make out the shape of a lion surrounded by wolves. This had once been a kingdom, not a prison. The realization sent a chill through her body. The beast stopped before a ruined gate swallowed by the forest. Great walls stretched into the distance, though time had nearly erased them. Cracked towers leaned beneath the weight of centuries. Wild flowers grew where soldiers had once marched. A silent palace stood in the center like the heart of a forgotten dream. She stared in disbelief. No story had ever spoken of this place. The kingdom had claimed the Black Divide was empty except for monsters. They had lied. The beast walked through the broken gate without looking back. She followed. Inside the ruined palace, the air felt strangely warm. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight that slipped between broken stones high above. Torn banners still hung from the walls. Their faded colors whispered of glory long lost. Massive thrones carved from black stone rested beneath shattered windows. One throne stood higher than all the others. The beast stopped before it. Slowly, he reached out with one clawed hand and rested it upon the worn arm of the throne. His eyes closed. Pain crossed his face. Not the pain of wounds, the pain of memory. For the first time, the woman saw something beyond the terrifying body. She saw grief. She saw a ruler who had lost everything except the burden of remembering. Softly, she spoke. "You lived here." The beast remained silent. His breathing became heavier. His claws dug into the ancient stone until small cracks spread beneath them. Then, without warning, he pulled his hand away, as though the memories themselves had burned him. The woman looked around the ruined hall once more. This had not been the home of a monster. It had been the palace of a king. Questions filled her mind faster than answers could come. Who had destroyed this place? Why had the kingdom erased it from history? Who was the beast before the curse claimed him? Outside the palace, the wind suddenly changed. The beast lifted his head. His sharp ears caught a distant sound. Footsteps, many of them. Heavy armor striking stone. The hunters had entered the Black Divide far sooner than expected. The ruling council had not come to rescue her. They had come to make certain neither she nor the beast survived. The beast slowly turned toward the forest. The calm in his eyes disappeared. Something ancient awakened beneath them. Not rage, command. The kind that once sent armies charging into impossible battles. The woman watched him stand taller than before. For a single moment, she no longer saw a cursed creature. She saw the shadow of the Alpha King. And somewhere beyond the trees, the first soldier crossed into the forgotten kingdom, unaware that he had just stepped into the domain of the ruler his ancestors had betrayed centuries ago. The sound reached him long before it reached her. Metal striking stone, boots crushing fallen branches. The hunters were still far beyond the outer trees, yet every step carried through the forgotten kingdom like a warning from the past. The beast stood motionless before the broken palace. His eyes remained fixed on the distant forest where the shadows slowly shifted. Nothing about him showed panic. Nothing revealed haste. He looked like a ruler who had spent a lifetime waiting for this exact moment. The woman watched him in silence. She realized that while the kingdom feared his strength, they had never spoken about his patience. A monster would have charged toward the danger. A king measured every move before making it. She stepped closer and looked into the darkness beyond the palace gates. The forest had changed. A few moments earlier, it had felt silent. Now it felt awake. Birds had disappeared from the branches. Small animals had vanished beneath the roots. Even the wind seemed to avoid the ancient paths leading toward the ruined throne. Nature itself knew strangers had crossed a forbidden line. The beast turned away from the entrance and walked deeper into the palace. His pace remained calm. He neither hurried nor looked behind him. She followed without speaking. Every hallway carried faded murals carved into stone. Time had stolen their colors, but not their meaning. Great warriors stood beside a crowned king whose face had been deliberately broken away. Whole sections of the walls had been destroyed as though someone wanted history itself to disappear. She stopped before one cracked image showing thousands of people raising their hands toward the same ruler. "They loved you," she whispered. The beast paused but gave no answer. His silence revealed more than words ever could. He continued forward until they entered a vast chamber beneath the palace. The ceiling rested on towering pillars covered with ancient markings. Broken weapons lay scattered across the floor where they had remained untouched for generations. Shields carried the same royal crest she had seen outside. Swords rested beside fallen armor now consumed by rust and dust. It did not look like the remains of a defeated army. It looked like the final stand of warriors who refused to abandon their king. She slowly knelt beside one skeleton whose hand still gripped the handle of a shattered sword. "They stayed with you until the end," she said softly. The beast closed his eyes. For one brief moment, grief crossed his face again. Then he lifted one enormous stone slab from the ground as though it weighed nothing. Beneath it rested a long wooden chest untouched by time. He placed it before her. She hesitated before opening it. Inside rested a royal cloak folded with impossible care. Beside it lay a polished crown of black steel decorated with silver wolves surrounding a single lion. The metal carried no rust, no dust. It looked as though someone had preserved it every single day despite the passing centuries. Her breathing slowed. This was not treasure. This was memory. She looked toward the beast. His eyes remained fixed upon the crown, but he made no attempt to touch it, almost as though he believed he no longer deserved it. Before she could speak, a distant horn echoed through the forest. The hunters had reached the outer walls. Voices followed soon after. Orders were shouted. Weapons were drawn. The kingdom had entered sacred ground without understanding what they disturbed. The beast slowly covered the chest once more. Then he turned toward another passage leading beneath the palace. She hurried after him. The tunnel stretched deep beneath the mountain. Strange crystals glowed faintly inside the stone walls, creating a soft silver light that guided every step. The air felt warmer here, cleaner, almost alive. Ancient symbols covered the ceiling from one end to the other. Some resembled wolves. Others resembled stars surrounding a single crown. The woman reached out to touch one carving. A sudden warmth spread through her hand. She quickly pulled it back. The beast looked at the symbol before looking at her. For the first time, his expression changed. Not with fear, with curiosity, as though something impossible had just happened. He walked closer and gently placed one claw upon the same symbol. Nothing happened. The light remained still. He looked back at her. Slowly, she touched the carving again. This time, every symbol across the tunnel began glowing together. Soft light flowed through the walls like rivers awakening after endless winter. The entire passage breathed with ancient power. Far above them, the hunters froze. Dust rained from the palace ceiling. The captain raised his sword while staring toward the underground halls. No one moved. Old stories claimed the beast lived alone. Old stories had never spoken of the palace awakening. Deep beneath the ruins, the beast stared at the glowing walls in complete silence. Then something happened that the woman never expected. Very slowly, he lowered one knee before the shining symbols. Not in surrender. In respect. He bowed his head as though greeting an old friend after countless years apart. The woman understood. These halls remembered him even if the world had forgotten. The light slowly faded. Silence returned. The beast rose once more. His posture had changed. The heavy sadness that had surrounded him since she first entered the forest seemed lighter now. Not gone, but weakened. Hope had entered a place where only grief had lived. Suddenly, another sound echoed through the tunnel. Not from ahead. Not from behind. From somewhere inside the mountain itself. A deep, ancient voice carried through the stone like distant thunder awakening from sleep. The words were too old to understand, yet both of them felt their meaning. The kingdom had not merely found the Alpha King. The kingdom had awakened something even older, something that had been waiting for its rightful ruler to return. The voice faded into silence, but the silence did not feel empty. It carried weight. It carried memory. The walls no longer looked like lifeless stone. They seemed to breathe with the heartbeat of an age the world had buried beneath lies. The woman stood still while the last traces of silver light disappeared into the ancient carvings. Questions filled her mind, yet none of them found words. She had entered the forest believing she would die before sunset. Instead, she had stepped into a forgotten kingdom where every stone seemed to recognize the beast as its rightful master. The world outside had called him a monster. Everything inside these halls called him king. The beast slowly turned toward the deeper passage. His movements remained calm, yet something inside him had changed. His shoulders no longer carried the same crushing weight of defeat. His eyes still held sorrow, but beneath it, another fire had begun to burn. It was quiet, controlled, dangerous. It was the look of someone remembering who he had once been. They continued through the tunnel until the stone walls opened into a vast underground sanctuary. The ceiling stretched so high that darkness swallowed its highest point. Water flowed through narrow streams carved into the floor, reflecting pale light across the chamber. Hundreds of stone wolves stood in perfect rows along both sides. Their eyes faced a single platform at the center, where an enormous throne had been carved directly from the mountain itself. Unlike the ruined throne above, this one remained untouched by time. No crack marked its surface. No dust rested upon it. It waited in complete silence as though expecting its king to return. The woman stopped several steps away. Awe settled over her like the first snowfall of winter. The beast approached the throne but did not sit. Instead, he placed one hand upon its arm. The entire sanctuary answered. A deep vibration rolled beneath the ground. The streams shimmered. The stone wolves seemed almost alive beneath the shifting light. Then ancient flames burst to life along the walls one after another, until the chamber glowed with warm golden light. The woman stepped back in disbelief. No human hand had lit those fires. The sanctuary itself had awakened. She looked toward the beast. His face remained still, but his breathing had grown heavier. This place remembered him, perhaps better than he remembered himself. A sudden movement caught her eye. One of the walls had begun to open. Massive stone doors slowly separated, revealing another hidden chamber beyond. Inside rested shelves carved into the mountain. Hundreds of scrolls remained carefully preserved inside crystal cases. Ancient weapons lined the walls. Banners carrying the royal crest hung untouched by age. Every object had been hidden from the world, waiting for the day someone worthy returned. The woman walked carefully inside. Her fingers brushed against one old painting resting upon a stone stand. Dust drifted softly into the air. The image showed a young king standing before thousands of cheering people. He wore the same black crown resting inside the chest above. His expression carried strength without cruelty. Children surrounded him. Old men smiled beside him. Women raised flowers instead of weapons. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the beast. The face in the painting was his, not the body, not the curse. Only the eyes remained exactly the same. She looked back at the painting again. "You were never their monster," she whispered. "You were their hope." The beast remained silent, yet something inside his eyes broke, not with weakness, with memory. He closed them for only a moment. Fragments returned. A child's laughter inside the palace gardens, the sound of soldiers raising their swords in loyalty, the warmth of a kingdom that had once trusted him with every heartbeat. Then came another memory. Darkness, poison, betrayal, blood spreading across white stone. Friends becoming enemies, brothers drawing blades. The memories struck him like a storm. He staggered backward. His claws scraped against the floor. Pain crossed his face with such force that even the woman felt it. She moved without thinking. She reached for him. Her hand rested gently against his arm. The moment her fingers touched his fur, the pain stopped. The beast slowly looked down at her. Neither of them understood what had happened, but the silence between them no longer felt unfamiliar. trust had begun to grow where fear should have lived. Far above the sanctuary, another sound echoed through the palace. Stones shattered, voices filled the halls. The hunters had broken through the outer gates. The captain led them carefully through the ruins with drawn swords. Nothing around them resembled the stories told by the kingdom. There were no piles of bones, no signs of endless slaughter. Instead, they found broken homes, collapsed towers, ancient gardens reclaimed by nature. One young soldier lowered his weapon. This was not a monster's den. This had been a city. The captain silenced him with a cold stare. "Keep moving." They advanced toward the palace. Every step carried them closer to truths their rulers had forbidden them to discover. Back inside the sanctuary, the beast suddenly lifted his head. He had heard them. His expression hardened once more. Not with hatred, with responsibility. He turned toward a long weapon resting upon the far wall. It was unlike any sword the woman had ever seen. Its black blade reflected no light. Silver runes stretched from its handle to its tip. The weapon seemed asleep. Waiting, the beast reached for it. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the runes burst into brilliant silver light. Power flowed through the chamber like a rising tide. The stone wolves lowered their heads. The ancient flames burned brighter. Even the mountain itself seemed to recognize its rightful guardian. The beast wrapped his hand around the sword. He lifted it with calm certainty, not as a creature claiming a weapon, as a king reclaiming a part of his soul. The woman watched in complete silence. The curse still covered his body, the beast still remained, but something greater had awakened beneath it. The Alpha King was no longer only surviving, he was beginning to return. Above them, the captain reached the entrance leading toward the hidden sanctuary. He placed one hand upon the ancient stone door and slowly pushed it open. The first thing he saw was not a monster. It was a king standing before a throne with a blade of living light in his hand. And for the first time in his life, the captain understood that the kingdom had feared the wrong ruler all along. The captain forgot to breathe. His fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword, yet every lesson he had learned as a soldier suddenly felt meaningless. The figure standing beyond the ancient doorway was nothing like the monster described in the royal records. The towering body still carried the marks of the curse. Black fur covered powerful shoulders. Long claws rested against the stone. Golden eyes shone beneath the dim light. Yet the way he stood transformed everything. There was no wild rage, no savage hunger. He carried himself with quiet authority. The ruined sanctuary itself seemed to bow before him. In that single moment, the captain understood why forgotten legends had once called him the Alpha King. Behind the captain, the soldiers slowly entered the chamber. One after another, they stopped walking. None of them expected to find a hidden kingdom sleeping beneath the mountain. None of them expected ancient flames burning without smoke. None of them expected stone wolves standing like silent guardians around a throne untouched by time. Their eyes moved from the glowing sword to the beast, then toward the young woman standing beside him without fear. Confusion spread through the ranks faster than any command. The woman looked from the soldiers to the Alpha King. She saw no hatred in his face. His breathing remained calm. His grip upon the ancient blade never tightened. Years of loneliness had not destroyed the discipline that once made him a ruler. He did not rush toward battle. He waited. He watched. He judged every heart standing before him. The captain slowly raised his sword. "In the name of the crown, you are condemned." The words echoed across the sanctuary. The Alpha King remained silent. His eyes never left the captain. The woman stepped forward before either side could move. "This place is not what they told you. Look around. Does this look like the home of a monster?" Her voice carried through the chamber with quiet strength. Several soldiers lowered their eyes. They saw carved banners instead of bones. They saw sacred halls instead of a den filled with death. Doubt entered their hearts. The captain noticed it immediately. "Do not listen. The king commands this creature destroyed." The woman shook her head. Then why did your king hide this place? Why did he erase every name carved into these walls? Why does every stone remember someone the kingdom tried to forget? Silence answered her. The youngest soldier slowly stepped closer to one of the ancient carvings. He brushed away years of dust with trembling fingers. Beneath it appeared the image of thousands of people standing together beneath the same royal crest. Children smiled beside warriors. Farmers stood beside nobles. No fear appeared on any face. He looked toward the captain. This cannot be false. The captain's expression hardened. Destroy every record. No one leaves this place alive. His command shattered the silence. Several soldiers hesitated. Others obeyed. They rushed toward the shelves holding the ancient scrolls. Before the first hand reached the hidden history, a deep sound rolled through the sanctuary. The Alpha King moved. No one saw the first step. One heartbeat, he stood beside the throne. The next, he stood between the soldiers and the sacred records. His sword never touched them. He simply blocked their path. The air itself seemed heavier. Every soldier stopped. None dared take another step. The woman watched in amazement. He had crossed the entire chamber faster than her eyes could follow. Yet he had not attacked. He had protected. The captain charged forward with a battle cry. His blade flashed toward the Alpha King. Steel met black silver. A single strike echoed through the mountain. The captain stumbled backward. His sword shattered into countless pieces. The fragments scattered across the stone floor. The ancient blade remained untouched. No anger crossed the Alpha King's face, only disappointment. The captain stared at the broken weapon in disbelief. Never before had his sword failed him. The soldiers looked at one another. Fear slowly replaced certainty. The beast they had hunted could have ended the fight with one blow. Instead, he had shown restraint. That frightened them far more. Outside the sanctuary, another sound drifted through the tunnels. Not marching, running. More footsteps approached from above. The kingdom had sent reinforcements. The captain smiled despite his broken weapon. You cannot hide forever. Every road into this forest belongs to the crown. Soon thousands will come. The Alpha King slowly turned his eyes toward the distant tunnel. For just a moment, memories returned. He remembered those same roads being built by his own people. He remembered watching children race through these valleys while music filled the air. Now those roads carried soldiers sent to erase the last truth. His heart grew heavier, not because enemies were coming, because his kingdom had forgotten itself. The woman stepped beside him. They are afraid of what you remember. That is why they lied. She looked into his golden eyes. They stole your throne. They stole your name. Do not let them steal your people forever. The words settled deep inside him. Something ancient awakened once again. Not power. Purpose. The Alpha King slowly walked toward the shattered doorway leading back into the ruined palace. Every step echoed with calm certainty. He no longer moved like a prisoner hiding from the world. He moved like a ruler preparing to reclaim it. Behind him, several soldiers lowered their weapons completely. They had entered the mountain believing they would kill a monster. Now they questioned every story they had ever believed. The captain saw loyalty slipping through his fingers. He shouted for them to stand firm. Very few answered. One young soldier removed the royal crest from his chest and placed it quietly upon the stone floor. He looked toward the Alpha King and lowered his head. Not in surrender, in respect. It was the first act of loyalty the forgotten king had received in countless years. Far beyond the mountain, hidden among the highest towers of the capital, an old blind priest suddenly opened his eyes. Though he could not see the world, he felt the change moving through it. He whispered a single sentence into the empty temple. The king has begun to walk again. And when those words faded into silence, the great bell beneath the ancient shrine rang by itself for the first time since the fall of the true Alpha King. The broken palace no longer felt abandoned. Every corridor carried the quiet weight of awakening. Ancient flames burned brighter with every passing moment. Dust that had rested for centuries drifted through the air as if the forgotten kingdom itself had begun to breathe again. The Alpha King stepped through the ruined halls without hesitation. His footsteps echoed against stone once polished by loyal hands long before betrayal poisoned the throne. The woman followed close behind while the few soldiers who had lowered their weapons exchanged uncertain glances. None of them understood why their hearts refused to see a monster where the kingdom had promised one. Outside the palace, the forest had changed. The wind carried distant horns from every direction. More royal banners appeared between the towering trees. Hundreds of soldiers moved through the Black Divide with careful determination. They expected a hunt. They expected an execution. They had no idea they were marching into the birthplace of the kingdom they believed they served. The Alpha King reached the highest balcony overlooking the valley below. Vines covered the ancient stone walls, yet the view stretched far across the endless forest. He stood there in complete silence. His golden eyes watched every movement beneath the trees. Groups of soldiers surrounded the outer ruins. Archers climbed broken towers. Scouts searched abandoned streets that had once echoed with music instead of marching boots. The woman joined him. "They are afraid of you." He slowly shook his head. His voice emerged for the first time since she had entered the Black Divide. "They are afraid of the truth." His words were deep and calm, carrying neither anger nor pride. They sounded like the voice of a ruler who had carried silence for far too long. She looked at him with quiet surprise. "You can speak?" A faint shadow of sadness crossed his face. "I chose silence because no one remained willing to hear." His answer settled heavily between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The forest below continued to fill with soldiers. Then another sound drifted through the valley. Not horns, not marching. Children. The woman looked toward the eastern road. A small group of frightened villagers stumbled through the trees carrying bundles upon their backs. Mothers held sleeping infants. Elderly men struggled to walk. Fear covered every face. Behind them rode royal cavalry. The villagers were not invading the forest. They were fleeing into it. The Alpha King narrowed his eyes. The soldiers quickly surrounded the helpless families. Their commander raised one hand. The villagers fell to their knees. Even from the balcony, the woman could see their terror. One little girl broke free from her mother and ran toward the forest. A soldier grabbed her before she reached the trees. The child cried for mercy. The commander answered by lifting his sword. The woman gasped, "Please!" The Alpha King did not wait. He stepped from the balcony. For one impossible heartbeat, it looked as though he had fallen into empty air. Instead, powerful ancient roots burst from the cliff beneath him. They carried him downward with effortless strength until he landed before the terrified villagers. The soldiers froze. The commander slowly lowered his blade. The beast had appeared without warning. The little girl stared up at the towering figure. Instead of screaming, she quietly reached for her mother's hand. The Alpha King looked at the commander. "Why do you hunt your own people?" The commander forced himself to stand tall. "They abandoned the kingdom," the Alpha King answered without raising his voice. "Or the kingdom abandoned them." The words struck harder than any weapon. The villagers looked at one another. An old man stepped forward despite trembling legs. "Your Majesty." The title escaped his lips before fear could stop it. The soldiers turned toward him in shock. Tears filled the old man's eyes. "My grandfather told me stories when I was young. He said there was once a king who fed the hungry before feeding himself. A king who walked among farmers without guards. A king who believed strength existed to protect." The commander shouted for silence. The old man ignored him. He fell to one knee before the Alpha King. "Forgive us. We believed the lies." One by one, the villagers followed, not because they feared the beast, because they recognized the king hidden beneath the curse. The woman watched the moment with tears gathering in her eyes. For the first time since betrayal stole his throne, someone had willingly chosen loyalty. No command forced it. No fear demanded it. Respect returned on its own. The commander could no longer hide his panic. He drew his sword. Arrest them all. Every traitor dies. Before any soldier moved, one of the captain's own men stepped between the commander and the villagers. Then another. Then another. Steel slowly lowered across the clearing. No one attacked. No one obeyed. The commander stared in disbelief. "You would betray your king." A young soldier answered with quiet certainty. "No. Today I finally found him." Silence spread through the forest. The commander backed away one careful step. He suddenly understood the greatest danger facing the crown. Not the beast. Hope. Hope spread faster than fear ever could. The Alpha King looked across every face standing before him. Villagers, soldiers, children. None of them saw a monster anymore. They saw a leader. His curse still covered his body, yet it could no longer hide the truth inside his eyes. Far away inside the royal capital, a black raven landed upon the window of the throne room. A frightened messenger rushed before the false king and collapsed onto the polished floor. His voice shook with terror. "Your Majesty, the beast is no longer alone." The false king slowly rose from his throne. His face lost every trace of confidence. How many stand beside him? The messenger swallowed hard. Not enough to call it an army. Not anymore. Every hour more people kneel before him. The throne room fell silent. The false king looked toward the ancient crown resting above his throne. For the first time in many years, he wondered whether it had ever truly belonged to him. And beyond the walls of the capital, the forgotten Alpha King took his first step toward reclaiming the kingdom that had never stopped waiting for its rightful ruler. Morning arrived without sunlight. Dark clouds covered the sky above the black divide, as though the heavens themselves refused to witness what was coming. A cold wind swept across the forgotten kingdom, carrying the scent of rain and old stone. The ruined towers no longer stood in silence. Fires burned inside abandoned homes. Villagers moved through broken streets, clearing fallen rocks and opening paths that had remained buried for generations. Soldiers who had once worn the royal crest now worked beside farmers and craftsmen without pride or shame. Every hand moved with quiet purpose. The forgotten city had begun to live again. The Alpha King walked through those streets without speaking. Children who had feared the beast only hours before now watched him with wide, curious eyes. They hid behind their mothers at first. Then one little boy stepped forward, holding a small white flower gathered from the old palace garden. The child looked up. "My mother says kings protect people." The Alpha King remained still. The boy slowly offered the flower with trembling hands. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the Alpha King carefully accepted the tiny gift. His great claw closed around the fragile flower without crushing a single petal. Something inside him softened. Not his strength, his loneliness. The woman watched from nearby. She smiled for the first time since entering the Black Divide. The curse had stolen his face. It had never stolen his heart. Far away inside the royal capital, fear spread faster than wildfire. Messengers ran through crowded halls. Generals argued behind locked doors. Every report sounded worse than the last. Villages near the Black Divide had stopped paying taxes. Royal patrols had disappeared without battle. Soldiers sent to destroy the beast had refused to return. The false king stood before a giant map covering the throne room wall. Red stones marked every town still loyal to the crown. One after another, those stones were quietly removed. His hands trembled. Not from age, from panic. A gray-haired advisor stepped forward. "Your Majesty." The people are beginning to believe the old stories. The false king slammed both hands onto the table. Then destroy every old story. Burn every temple. Execute every priest who speaks his name. Fear must return before hope grows stronger. The advisor lowered his eyes. Even he no longer believed fear would be enough. Back inside the Forgotten Kingdom, another discovery waited beneath the palace. The woman followed the Alpha King through a narrow passage hidden behind the ancient throne. Water dripped from the ceiling as they descended deeper into the mountain. The air grew colder with every step. At the end of the tunnel stood a single stone door. Unlike every other doorway, this one carried no carvings, no symbols, no signs of age. The Alpha King stopped before it. His breathing slowed. He had not entered this place since the night everything was taken from him. The woman quietly waited. He placed one hand upon the cold stone. The door slowly opened. Inside rested a small chamber untouched by time. No treasure filled the room, no weapons waited inside, only memories. A wooden cradle stood beside the wall. Tiny carved animals rested upon a shelf. A faded blue blanket remained folded with gentle care. The woman looked around in silence. This had once been a child's room. The Alpha King stepped forward with heavy feet. His fingers brushed the edge of the cradle. Pain crossed his face stronger than any wound. He finally spoke. "My son." The words barely escaped his lips. The woman froze. "You had a child." He slowly nodded. His eyes never left the empty cradle. He was only 3 winters old. The night they betrayed me, they took him before the curse claimed me. I searched until my mind broke. I never found him. Silence filled the room. The woman felt tears rising. Every story she had heard spoke of a monster. None had spoken of a father. She stepped beside him. "Do you believe he survived?" The Alpha King closed his eyes. "For years I prayed he did. Then I prayed he had not. No child should carry the burden I left behind." The room became impossibly still. Even the wind outside seemed to disappear. The woman gently picked up a tiny wooden wolf carved by careful hands. Someone loved this child deeply. The Alpha King looked toward the toy. "I made that for him." The words carried more sorrow than anger, more love than regret. Suddenly, footsteps echoed through the passage. One of the former royal soldiers hurried inside. He bowed his head. "My king. Scouts have returned." The title came naturally now. No hesitation remained. The Alpha King turned. "Speak." The soldier struggled to catch his breath. "The royal army has surrounded the Black Divide. Thousands wait beyond the valley. Siege towers are being built. The false king marches with them." Silence followed. No fear entered the Alpha King's eyes, only certainty. He looked once more toward the empty cradle, then toward the woman. Everything they stole began here. Everything ends here. They left the hidden chamber together. Outside the palace, every villager gathered within the ancient square. Men, women, children. Former soldiers, old priests who had secretly preserved forgotten prayers. All waited in complete silence. The Alpha King climbed the broken palace steps. For the first time since losing his throne, he stood above his people. The curse still covered his body. His claws still reflected the fading daylight, yet no one looked away. No one feared him. They saw only their king. He looked across every face, every wound, every hope. His voice carried across the silent city. "They stole our kingdom. They stole our history. They taught our children to fear their own blood. Today, that ends." No cheers followed, only quiet determination, because every person standing there understood the cost of those words. War had finally arrived. Beyond the outer walls, thousands of royal soldiers raised black banners beneath the dark sky. At the center of the army, the false king looked toward the forgotten city through a polished golden telescope. His face slowly hardened. Then he whispered words that only his closest advisor could hear. If I cannot kill the Alpha King, then I will destroy everyone who chooses him." And with that command, the first line of siege engines rolled toward the ancient kingdom as thunder echoed across the mountains, announcing the beginning of the battle that would decide who truly deserved the crown. The first stones never reached the walls. They crashed against an invisible force that rippled through the air before shattering into thousands of fragments. Dust rolled across the valley like a rising storm. Every soldier in the royal army stopped where he stood. The siege engines fell silent. Even the horses refused to move another step. No one had expected the Forgotten Kingdom to defend itself. No one had believed the old magic still lived beneath those broken towers. The false king lowered his hand. His face darkened. For years he had believed the ancient barrier had died with the Alpha King. Instead, it stood stronger than ever. His advisor looked toward the city with fear. "The barrier has awakened," the false king answered without looking away. "No, he has awakened." High above the valley, the Alpha King stood upon the outer wall beside the woman. Wind swept across the ruined stones, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Below them, thousands of soldiers stretched across the valley like an endless sea of steel. Black banners moved beneath the dark sky. Fires burned beside countless tents. The enemy possessed overwhelming numbers, yet the Alpha King remained completely still. He had faced impossible odds before. Numbers had never decided the fate of kingdoms. Hearts did. The woman studied the army below. "They will attack before nightfall." He slowly nodded. "They fear darkness. Not because of me, because truth spreads where fear cannot see." She looked toward him. "Then we give them something greater than truth. We give them hope." The Alpha King looked across the valley one final time before turning toward the ancient city. People gathered inside every street. Former soldiers repaired broken walls. Farmers carried stones beside blacksmiths. Young men sharpened old weapons recovered beneath the palace. Old women prepared food for strangers they had only met the day before. No one had ordered them. No one demanded their loyalty. They chose it. That alone made them stronger than any army forced to obey. The Alpha King walked into the center of the city. Every eye followed him. The curse still covered his body. Yet no child cried. No mother pulled her family away. The fear that had ruled generations had finally begun to disappear. He stopped before the ancient fountain where kings once greeted their people. Clear water flowed again after centuries of silence. He rested his hand upon the stone. For a brief moment, memories returned. Music filled the streets. Children laughed beneath bright banners. Merchants welcomed travelers from distant kingdoms. Life had once flourished here. Not because of power, because justice had lived beside it. The woman stepped beside him. Can this city truly stand against them? He looked toward the flowing water. Stone alone cannot defend a kingdom. People do. Before another word could be spoken, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A loud crack echoed from the northern wall. Scouts rushed through the streets. Their faces carried alarm. The royal army had brought enormous iron rams hidden behind heavy shields. The ancient barrier still protected the city from stones and arrows. It could not stop steel striking the gates. The Alpha King immediately moved. His pace never changed. He did not run. He simply walked with complete certainty toward the northern entrance. The people followed. Not because they were commanded, because courage has a way of multiplying when someone refuses to fear. The massive gate stood beneath towering walls covered in vines. Each strike from the iron ram echoed like thunder across the city. Dust fell from the old stone. Wood groaned beneath the endless assault. Outside, thousands of soldiers pushed forward together. The false king watched from a distant hill. Break the gate, leave no survivor. Another strike shook the entrance. The heavy beams began to split. Panic spread among the youngest defenders. Some looked toward the Alpha King, searching for answers. He stepped before the trembling gate. Then he drove the glowing sword into the stone beneath his feet. Silver light raced across the ground. Ancient symbols hidden beneath layers of earth suddenly appeared. The entire gateway awakened. Great pillars rose slowly from beneath the mountain. Stone wolves emerged beside the walls. Not living creatures, guardians carved by forgotten hands. Their eyes burned with pale light. The attacking soldiers stumbled backward in terror. The iron ram struck once more. This time it shattered into splinters. The stone wolves remained unmoving, watching, waiting. The valley fell silent. No one understood what they had just witnessed. The false king gripped the edge of his command platform until his knuckles turned white. Every legend he had mocked as childish stories now stood before him. His greatest weapon had been broken without a single battle. One frightened general approached him. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should negotiate." The false king turned with cold fury. "Negotiate with the man whose crown my family stole." His voice became quieter, more dangerous. "There can only be one king." He raised one hand toward the archers waiting behind the front lines. Thousands lifted burning arrows. The general hesitated. "There are villagers inside. Children." The false king answered without emotion. "Ash cannot remember the truth. The command was given." The sky darkened. Thousands of burning arrows rose together like a river of fire climbing toward the heavens. The woman looked upward. Her heart stopped. There were too many. Even the ancient barrier could not stop flames from falling inside the city. Families pulled children close. The defenders looked helplessly toward the sky. The Alpha King slowly lifted his head. His golden eyes reflected every falling flame. Then something extraordinary happened. The wolves carved into every wall across the Forgotten Kingdom began to glow. A deep sound rolled beneath the mountain. Not a roar. Not thunder. A call. From every corner of the Black Divide, living wolves answered together. Hundreds, then thousands. Their voices echoed across the valley with terrifying unity. The royal horses panicked. Archers broke formation. Fear spread through the army faster than fire. The Alpha King remained standing before the city gates while the first burning arrows descended from the sky. Then the forest itself began to move. The forest answered before the kingdom did. From every ridge and hidden valley, wolves emerged in endless numbers. Gray wolves, black wolves, white wolves scarred by countless winters. They poured from the shadows like a living river until the ground itself seemed to breathe beneath them. They did not attack blindly. They spread across the valley with perfect order, as though following commands spoken long before any human kingdom existed. The royal horses screamed in terror. Riders struggled to control them. Archers dropped burning arrows before they ever reached their targets. Fear shattered the confidence of an army that had marched believing victory was certain. The Alpha King never moved from the city gate. His sword remained planted in the ancient stone while silver light flowed beneath his feet like streams of liquid fire. The wolves gathered before him and lowered their heads. Thousands of golden eyes turned toward a single ruler. The woman stood beside him and watched the impossible unfold. She finally understood why the oldest legends had never called him Master of Beasts. They had called him Guardian of the Wild. The creatures of the Black Divide had not obeyed his strength. They remembered his kindness. Across the battlefield, the false king watched everything collapse before his eyes. His soldiers no longer marched together. Formations broke apart beneath panic. Officers shouted desperate commands that disappeared beneath the endless howls echoing across the valley. The advisor standing beside the throne carriage slowly removed his royal chain and placed it upon the ground. The false king stared at him. "What are you doing?" The old advisor lowered his eyes, serving the wrong king for too many years. Without another word, he turned his horse away from the royal banners. Several commanders followed him, then dozens more. The false king reached for his sword, but stopped. He finally understood that fear had carried him to power. Fear could never keep him there forever. The Alpha King slowly lifted his ancient blade from the stone. The silver light faded. The wolves raised their heads together. The battlefield became completely silent. He stepped forward. Only one step. The wolves followed, not as an army rushing towards slaughter. As guardians walking beside the ruler, they had waited centuries to see again. The royal soldiers looked into the eyes of the advancing Alpha King, and something unexpected happened. One after another, swords slipped from trembling hands. Shields touched the earth. Helmets were removed. Men who had entered the valley ready for battle slowly knelt where they stood. The woman watched tears fill the faces of old veterans who suddenly remembered stories whispered by grandparents long before the crown outlawed them. One gray-haired soldier stepped away from the royal line. His voice shook. "My grandmother said the true king would return when wolves guarded children instead of hunting them." He dropped to one knee. "Forgive us." The movement spread through the valley. Hundreds knelt, then thousands. The false king looked around in horror. His entire army was abandoning him without a single battle, his face twisted with rage. "Cowards, every one of you!" He climbed onto his black horse and drew a sword covered with gold and jewels. "If no one else will finish this, then I will." He drove his horse forward alone, racing toward the Alpha King with desperate fury burning in his eyes. The valley held its breath. The woman started forward, but stopped when the Alpha King gently raised one hand. He would face this alone. The distance between the two kings disappeared quickly. One ruled through fear, the other through loyalty. The false king swung his sword with all the strength anger could give. The Alpha King moved only enough to lift his blade. Steel met ancient silver. The sound echoed across the mountains. The jeweled sword cracked from its tip to its handle. Another heartbeat passed. The weapon shattered completely. Thousands of glittering fragments scattered across the valley. The false king stared at the empty hilt still clutched inside his hand. His knees weakened. The Alpha King lowered his sword. "I once called you family." His deep voice carried across the silent battlefield. "You chose a crown instead of honor. You chose lies instead of truth. Look around. This is the kingdom you created." The false king slowly turned. No soldiers stood behind him, no generals, no banners raised proudly toward the sky. Only frightened men waiting for someone to end generations of hatred. His shoulders collapsed beneath the weight of everything he had become. The woman stepped quietly beside the Alpha King. Her eyes rested upon the broken ruler. "This is not your victory. It is the truth returning home." The false king closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, no excuse came to his lips. No anger remained. Only defeat. Far above the valley, the clouds slowly began to separate. Warm sunlight touched the forgotten city for the first time in centuries. Its broken towers shone like polished gold. Flowers hidden beneath ruined streets opened together beneath the light. The wolves quietly stepped aside, creating a path leading from the battlefield to the ancient gates. The Alpha King looked toward the city that had waited for him through endless years of silence. Then he began walking home. Behind him, thousands of voices rose together. Not in celebration, not in fear, in loyalty. And as the ancient gates slowly opened, the forgotten kingdom welcomed its true king once again, while one final mystery waited inside the palace where destiny had not yet revealed its greatest secret. The ancient gates closed behind the Alpha King with a deep sound that rolled across the valley like the final page of a long-forgotten story. Silence followed, not the silence of fear, the silence of peace returning to a land that had not known it for generations. The people slowly entered the restored city carrying neither weapons nor chains. Children ran through streets where soldiers had once marched. Mothers smiled without looking over their shoulders. Old men stood beneath the rebuilt walls with tears quietly falling across weathered faces. Many had spent their entire lives believing they would never see this day. Yet the impossible now stood before them. The Alpha King walked alone toward the highest tower of the palace. Every step carried memories that no one else could see. He remembered the first stone placed by loyal builders. He remembered the laughter of his queen echoing through the gardens. He remembered holding his little son high above his shoulders while the people below celebrated another year of peace. Those memories no longer brought only pain. They became a promise that the future could carry light once again. The woman followed him until they reached the palace entrance. She stopped before the great doors and quietly smiled. "This place belongs to you." The Alpha King looked at her with gratitude resting inside his golden eyes. "No, it belongs to everyone who never stopped believing that truth would return." Together, they entered the throne hall. Sunlight poured through the broken ceiling, touching the ancient throne waiting at the end of the chamber. Dust floated gently through the warm air. Every banner had been restored by willing hands. The scars of betrayal still marked the stone, yet they no longer defined the kingdom. Hope had begun replacing every wound. The former soldiers gathered inside the hall beside villagers and craftsmen. The old priest slowly approached, carrying the black crown that had rested beneath the mountain for centuries. His trembling hands held it with the greatest care. He bowed before the Alpha King. This crown never belonged to power. It belonged to sacrifice. It waited for the day its true king returned. The Alpha King looked at the crown for a long moment. Then he slowly knelt before his people. Gasps filled the hall. The old priest looked confused. "My king, why do you kneel?" The Alpha King lifted his eyes toward every face surrounding him. A king who kneels before his people will never force them to kneel before fear. The old priest smiled through quiet tears. He gently placed the crown upon the Alpha King's head. The moment the ancient steel touched him, the curse began to fade. Golden light surrounded his body. The black fur slowly disappeared. The long claws became human hands once more. The scars of countless battles remained, yet the monstrous form vanished like darkness before dawn. For the first time in generations, the true face of the Alpha King returned. The hall fell completely silent. He looked exactly as the ancient paintings had shown, strong without arrogance, calm without weakness. The people were not looking at a legend anymore. They were looking at their king. The woman stood quietly watching the miracle unfold. The Alpha King turned toward her. "When the whole world abandoned me, you chose compassion instead of fear. When I had forgotten who I was, you reminded me that a king is never measured by his throne." He gently took her hand before the gathered kingdom. Today, this kingdom receives not only its king, it receives the woman who gave it back its future. Thunderous cheers echoed through every hall. Outside the palace, the bells rang across the city. Flowers covered the streets. Music returned to places that had known only silence. Children laughed beside wolves resting peacefully in the sunlight. The Black Divide was no longer remembered as the land of monsters. It became the Valley of the Alpha King. As evening covered the kingdom, the Alpha King climbed alone onto the highest balcony overlooking his people. The woman joined him without speaking. Together they watched thousands of lights appear across the city as families returned home without fear for the first time in living memory. The wind carried a feeling of peace. Then the Alpha King quietly looked toward the distant mountains far beyond his kingdom. His expression changed. The woman noticed it immediately. "What is it?" His eyes remained fixed upon the dark horizon. "The curse is broken. The throne is restored. But the betrayal that created all of this did not begin here." She followed his gaze. Far beyond the mountains, a single black banner rose above the distant skyline. Someone else had been watching. Someone powerful enough to remain hidden while kingdoms destroyed one another. The Alpha King spoke with quiet certainty. "The battle for my kingdom is over. The battle for the world has just begun." The woman stood beside him without fear. "Then wherever you go, I will walk beside you." The Alpha King smiled for the first time since losing everything all those years ago. Below them, the restored kingdom shone beneath the stars like a promise fulfilled. Above them, the night sky stretched toward an unknown future waiting to be written. And somewhere beyond the distant mountains, another ruler slowly rose from his throne after hearing only 4 unforgettable words. "The Alpha King lives again.